Hey guys, welcome back to our channel, The Purpose Driven Homestead. Today we're going to share with you 5 reasons why you shouldn't use one of these bags of potting soil from your local big box stores to start your seeds in. And we'll give you some ideas on some ways that you can make your own. Stick around. If you're like us, you are so ready to get started in your garden this year. Now here in the Midwest, it's still really cold though, and we have no way to start our seeds outdoors anytime soon because it's simply not warm enough for them to germinate. Now our solution for that is to start our plants that take the longest time to grow indoors. Those are things like pepper plants. Our bell peppers will start inside, our onions will start inside, and even things like collards and tomatoes. We'll start those very early because the plants need to be very large when you start harvesting. So in those cases, we'll start them indoors, but they've got to have a really good medium to start. Now I'm going to give you 5 reasons today why I recommend you don't use potting soil from the big box stores, and instead you make your own. The first reason today is because most of this stuff is not organic. Now you can find some that are, but most of these bags aren't organic and they don't even pretend to be. This one even says right on the top up here, plus fertilizer. So you know right out of the bat, since the definition of organic is no man-made products like fertilizers or herbicides or pesticides, then you're going to want to make sure that you go for something that's organic. Unless this doesn't mean that anything to you. But for most of us, we're trying to get more and more organic and trying to use less and less of the man-made fertilizers and using things that are a little bit more natural. The other thing is you don't know what ingredients actually go into these bags. Now in this case, it typically has mulch and compost, but you don't know what went into those, and neither does the company most of the time. They buy these products from other providers. And so the control that they have, even the best intentioned companies, don't have a lot of control over the products that go into these mixes. I'll give you a great example. The mulch that goes in here, it's often that you find big piles of mulch and things like treated lumber, telephone poles that have been chipped up and are resold because they're out, they've been replaced and something needs to be done with them. They'll be chipped up and sold to a lot of mulching places. It's very easy for those to get intermingled, for those to get interspersed with your product that then goes into the potting mix soil. So you just don't know what chemicals might be leaching into the roots of your plants and then also obviously into the vegetables and fruits that you're growing with it. The second reason why I encourage you not to use this potting soil is because it's so inconsistent from bag to bag. They have the numbers at the bottom and they tell you what's in the bag, but if you go online and look at any of the big box stores' reviews on these things, what you'll see over and over and over again, more often than not, is that it's inconsistent. Some people are complaining that it's all peat moss. Some people are complaining that it's all mulch. You're never getting the same consistency from bag to bag. Sometimes there's perlite included, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's a little. It's just not consistent. And you want something that you know what went into it. So that's number 1. Hopefully it's all organic. And then number 2, you want it to be a consistent thing that you can plant in, and you know that your plants are going to have all the right things and they're going to have them in the right ingredients and the right mixtures. The third reason why I don't think potting soil is a good idea is because in these bags, it tends to spoil easily. Now you can see on this bag, there's these little small holes that go down the side. This top one's open, but the rest of them down the side are barely punched out at all, and many of them actually don't even have a hole all the way through them. Those are designed to drain out the water when these things get wet, right? So if you go to any of the big box stores, they're gonna have these things packed, I don't know how many tall, on pallets, sitting up on these big racks, and it rains. They're typically wrapped in plastic as well. So you've got a plastic bag, and then it's wrapped with a plastic to keep it on the pallet and keep it together while it's stacked. And the problem is it's raining from the top of these things, and that water is getting into that, and oftentimes it gets into these bags and it causes it to spoil. And when you see these things spoiled, they'll get clumpy and it'll start taking on a really nasty smell, almost like a swampy or rotten type of smell to it. That's where it's spoiled. And when you get that, the bacteria that are growing inside of there will often make it so that it's not nearly as good. It uses a lot of the nutrients up. It makes it so it kind of spoils. Now, You can, in fact, go back and try to dry that stuff out, take it out of the bag, lay it out, dry it out in the sun, kind of get it to a point where you can bust it up and get it out of those the clumpy nature that it has, and try to reuse it. But that's not often going to work for you, and typically you don't get nearly as good results as you would have otherwise. Now, the fourth reason why I encourage you to use something besides this potting soil is because the nutrients in here fade very quickly. That NPK value that you get on there, those things fade out of this potting soil fast. So if you've ever used potting soil before and you wind up planting your seedlings and they start off great, and then all of a sudden what happens is they start slowing in their growth. Maybe they get 1 inch or 2 inches tall, 3 inches tall, and they start getting yellow. They start looking puny, they start drying up, and eventually they die. That is a great example of where the nutrients often aren't there in the potting soil. What they do with these bags is they keep them year over year. So if they don't sell, which they often won't, they won't sell all of these bags at the end of the year. They'll typically have a few of these pallets left. And there's a lot of bags on those pallets. And so what they do is they sell these bags first. So for some of us who want to get an early start, you'll go out and you'll buy a bag of this potting soil, but it's actually a year old. So this potting soil has been sitting there for approximately a year, getting rained on. All of those nutrients are leaching out from these holes. It's sitting inside this plastic for an entire year, right? Those aren't good combinations for great vegetables or a great start for your plants. Plus, I have no idea what's leaching out of these bags into that potting soil. The other thing is when you put this soil into your containers that you're going to start your seeds in, a lot of times when you start watering it and it drains out, those man-made chemicals, the NPK values start to decrease pretty rapidly because they're water soluble. In a lot of cases, those are going to then leach out through the water that then drains out of the bottom of your containers. So you actually want something that's not going to be so much of a flash in the pan like these fertilizers, and then instead you're going to have something that's going to be more of a sustained product. The fifth reason, and this one shouldn't be any surprise to anyone, is that these bags are really expensive. This bag at the time that I make this video is actually going for about $12 a bag right now. Now, that's pretty expensive, especially when you start considering that every year you buy these bags. You don't typically reuse the potting soil. It goes into your garden or into your containers, and then you're buying new soil the next year to add to that because all of those chemicals, as we talked about, have already leached out. And so the garden soil itself isn't that value anymore. So you can't really reuse it the same way that maybe you could reuse garden soil. So this stuff is just expensive in the long haul, and you're going to pay every single year to use it. Now I'm going to give you a bonus, a number 6 bonus right now, and it's a small one, but I think it's important enough to mention. The other problem with the potting soils is they tend to compact really badly. So what you'll have is your roots from your plants can't find the gaps in the soil in order to spread out and allow the plant to grow properly. You want something that's loose enough that the roots can find their way down and it can get a really strong root structure that then allows the plant to take up all the nutrients that are in there as well. So these potting soils tend to compact really badly, and that's not something that you want either. But there's good news. I'm going to share with you some ways that you can create your own. Now on our homestead, we use 3 different things to make our potting soil. We use a combination of 50% garden soil, we use 30% compost, and then we use 20% rabbit manure. Now, those 3 things together are fantastic, and we can control the mix, and we know what goes into those products. Now, why do we choose 50% garden soil? Well, we go out and we actually scrape up the top layer, that rich topsoil layer of our garden that we use year over year. It's got lots of great nutrients. Now, in our case, this year, we actually were digging it up when it was frozen, so we had to go out there early and dig that stuff up and create the base for our potting soil. The second thing that we use is compost. Now, when I say compost, we make our own compost on site here. We have a large family, so there's a lot of stuff that we tend to throw away, but the compost in our space is a combination of things like banana peels and potato peels and all the stuff that you use when you're making your own food in your own home. But then in addition to that, we've got all of the things that we grow in our garden. When that gets done, we tend to pile it up into our composter as well. We'll also take any of our garden clippings and things like that out of our yard and leaves. We add all of that, right? You want a mixture of browns and greens, but we will compost all of that. In addition, we throw things like our crushed eggs in there. We have chicken manure. We have all of those things that kind of come together in some of those wood chips. We tend to use, instead of pine, we'll try to use aspen or something like that that has a little bit less of that pine residue. But we use a lot of those things and we'll compost it over time into this really, really rich, dark compost that I think is fantastic. And again, we know 100% of where it came from. So that's the next portion. And then the final portion is rabbit manure. Now you might be thinking, why rabbit manure? Well, if you look at this bag that says it comes with fertilizer has a mix of 0.10, 0.08, 0.06. So that NPK value is 0.10, 0.08, 0.06. That's really low. I mean, to say that it has fertilizer in it is kind of a misnomer, right? It's not got a lot of anything in it. If you were to go and buy fertilizer in your store, right, it's going to have some really astronomical numbers. It's going to be something like 10, 10, 10 or 10, 12, 10, or it's going to be big numbers like that. But this is very small numbers, right? They're very, very low in concentration. Now, in our mix, however, when you think about it, that outside of the garden soil that has lots of trace elements and the compost that has lots of great values and lots of minerals and that kind of stuff that come in it, the rabbit manure is one of the best manures on the market that you can add to any type of compost or into garden soil or into potting soil. The combination of that NPK value for the rabbit manure is far greater than it would be for almost any other manure out there. So I'll give you an example. So this is 0.10, 0.08, 0.06, right? That's the NPK value for this. If you look at rabbit manure, it's 2.4, 1.4, and 0.60. That's a pretty big difference, right? That's 10 times the nitrogen, 17 times the phosphorus, and 10 times the potassium. So those are big numbers, right? It's a many-fold increase in how much of those resources are available to your plants. Now let's compare that. Chicken manure is 1.1, 0.8, and 0.5, and cow manure, which you can buy in a lot of the big box stores as well, tends to be more like 0.25, 0.15, 0.25. So again, those numbers are really, really low compared to the 2.4, 1.4, and 0.60 that you get with rabbit manure. So that's why we encourage you, if you don't know someone that you can find rabbit manure from, look around, go to your garden center, go to your, some of your Tractor Supplies or your Rural Kings or Agri Supply, right? Whatever you're nearby that maybe is a feed store, a lot of times you can go in there and you can find people who are selling rabbit manure from their farm. It's fantastic, it's organic, and you can really see the difference in how it produces. So those three things we mix together in that mix, like I told you, 50% garden soil, 30% of our compost, and then 20% for our rabbit manure. We mix all that together, and you can see here, this is what it looks like when we mix it together. It looks really, really good. Now I'm going to show you a comparison here. Now this is what we use in our garden today, right? This is what we have in our cups and that we use to plant in. Look how loose and rich this stuff is. That's the kind of stuff that you want to use. However, if you look over here at this other product, right, this is some of that garden potting mix soil. That stuff just simply compacts down. It doesn't look as healthy. It looks kind of rancid, right? It's got this brownish color to it. It's not what you want. Ours is loose. It gives all of the roots an adequate supply of air, an adequate supply of nutrients, and it allows them to grow thick and strong. So that's why we choose to make our own potting mix that we use for our seedling. Now, the last thing that I'll share with you guys before we go is that no matter what you mix, what your mix looks like, if you have a hard time with it draining, if it doesn't seem like it wants to drain very well, consider adding some perlite to the mix. Now, I wouldn't use this kind. This actually is some we've had for several years now. I just grabbed it out so I could show you the bag. This actually has fertilizer built into it. We're trying to get away from using that anymore. So I wouldn't recommend this one, but there are bags of perlite that you can buy out there that don't have anything added. It's just pure perlite. I'd encourage you to go grab those. This stuff is great because if you're having a problem with drainage, right, water wants to stay in the top, it doesn't want to seep into it. This can really add those pockets of air so that your roots can become healthy and they can kind of find their way through, but it also allows water to drain through. Now, if you're using other stuff that the water already drains out really quickly, you don't need to add any perlite. So you'll have to make that decision, kind of look at it, maybe take a small sample, pour some water on it, see how the water moves through, put it in a cup, put it in whatever you're going to plant in. use the water, let it kind of move through and see at what rate it soaks it up and or moves through the medium. If you need it to move faster so that it allows it to drain better, then consider adding perlite. It's a really neat product. It actually looks like styrofoam, but it's not at all. It's actually a volcanic product that they mine, but it's super light. It'll actually float on water, but it's got this airy kind of popcorny feel to it. And when you add it in there, it just gives those air pockets so that you can mix it in, and it works out really well with the soil, and it stays for virtually ever, right? It's like a tiny light rock it's full of air itself. So you can actually use it for a lot of things. Some people even use it for rocket stoves to kind of insulate the rocket stove. They'll mix it with concrete. But perlite's a really neat product. I just encourage you to consider using it. Guys, if you've enjoyed our video today and you're asking yourself, how can I help these guys grow? One of the ways that you can help is by clicking that like button. It shows the algorithm, hey, this is a video that's worth showing to other people as well. You can also subscribe to our channel and help us grow that way as well. Our goal is to help you and others learn how to backyard homestead and do what you can with what you have. There are so many of us living in small spaces, in small subdivisions that want to return back to growing our own food and doing more for ourselves. And we want to help you learn how to do that, learn from some of our successes and learn from some of our failures. We're actually working on a video right now about how we're going to plant our seeds for this year and how we're going to start some of the ones I mentioned to you earlier in the video. So be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, check out some of these other videos that you might like. We'll see you next time on the Purpose Driven Homestead.